But it's really important to notice that we can all shift between all of these states. And so the goal is not to have none of these stress responses. So we don't want to not have fight or fight or freeze or shut down. We want to be able to get back to ventral vagal as quickly as possible and try to stay in there as much as we can. So it's about recognizing when you're on either side and having that intention to come back to the middle. So every tool that Dr. Samir and I are going to cover, it works through that same mechanism. We're going to be moving from like sympathetic or dorsal vagal back to the ventral vagal, and it's just based on physiology. Now I want to bring up this model specifically because it really applies to what's happening in the workplace right now. This is called the job demands resource model. It's actually one of the most validated models in organizational psychology. The core principle of this is that when the demands significantly outweigh resources, burnout and disengagement will follow. So under normal circumstances, we're able to manage job demands reasonably well, but in crisis, it breaks in a predictable way. So workload doesn't decrease, often it might even increase, and then we add these additional layers, so that constant monitoring in the background, thinking about family and home concerns, maybe not sleeping so well over the last few days, and then the emotional labor of your own anxiety. So your resources, your capacity, your focus, all of that can drop. So in crisis, demands rise while resources drop. And so it can just feel like depletion. So I just wanted to bring this model up because it can really help you to think about how you're treating yourself in these days. And it matters enormously of how we treat each other. So how can we leverage some protecting resources? There are 4 concrete layers that leaders can actually employ to create more resources for employees. So the first one is autonomy, and we can do this by, for example, giving people choice where they work, maybe how they're sequencing their tasks or what they tackle first. So basically the antidote to the helplessness that we might be feeling is actually a little bit of control. Even smaller choices can really resonate with our nervous system. The second way to protect resources, and we can call these shields, is clarity. So we want to be very clear and consistent about what is known, what is not. Source of stress, so and not just about the answers. Shield number 3, social support. These are regular check-ins, psychological safety, being really cohesive with your team. These are not really like nice to haves in these last week. These are resources actually. It creates us an opportunity for all of us to co-regulate together, and it's actually been shown that connection actually lowers cortisol. And finally, the 4th shield is reduced decision load. So in this time, we can simplify choices, pause anything that's really non-critical or non-critical decisions when you can, because every decision right now is drawing from the same depleted cognitive reserve. So we really need to protect what is left. So there's a lot of research on what can help with for leaders in crisis, specifically transformational leadership. These are called the 4 I's that can help us in crisis. So it breaks out into 4 components. So ways that we can act as leaders if you're in a leadership position, how you can impact your employees. So the first is idealized influence. And so what that means is that a leader's emotional tone really sets the tone for the entire team. So their emotional regulation is really important. The calmest nervous system in the room influences the rest. And you cannot regulate others if you're not regulated yourself. The second one, inspirational motivation. Try to reconnect with your team to share purpose and meaning beyond the work or tasks at hand or immediate crisis. maybe real reasons why the work matters. Number 3, intellectual stimulation. So invite solutions and ask questions. So we want to activate the thinking brain, not that reactive brain that's already kind of running. So teams that are given opportunities to solve and shift, they kind of can help shift into agency. So it's a neurological shift that really helps. And finally, individualized concern. So as we talked about before, we really want to recognize that different people may need different things. The person who may look fine may not really be feeling fine. So just look for the state, not just people's behavior. So stress response in teams, it's really about understanding where everyone is. So person 1 might be sitting in a ventral vagal state, feeling very calm, upright, speaking openly, ready to collaborate, problem solve. Person number 2 might be in that sympathetic activation state. So maybe feeling a bit tense. You might notice some tension, rapid speech, scanning for danger. And then person 3 might be in that dorsal vagal space. So maybe withdrawn, having low energy, or checking out. And so the important thing is to notice that teams, they don't respond to stress or experience stress in the same way. And we want to actually look for the state, not just the behavior, and try to manage that state. So this is the easiest way that I can explain what actually happens to the brain when we're under threat. So we have 3 levels here. The thinking brain, so this is like the prefrontal cortex that's responsible for logic, empathy, planning, emotional regulation, complex problem solving, and this is where we ideally want to be. In the middle, we have the reacting brain. So this is the amygdala. It's like the fire alarm or the smoke alarm of the nervous system, and it's really activated by uncertainty. When we're activating or acting from this part of the brain, logic is completely out of the window, and we are, emotions are high, and it's flight or fight. And then at the base, this is our survival brain. So this is, the brain that is responsible for automatic functions. Under extreme stress or prolonged overload, we can shut down. We can feel numb, we can freeze, and we're trying to save energy. So when we're in crisis, the brain shifts from thinking to reacting to then survival. And so what we're going to be giving you today is tools to help you climb back up from survival back to that thinking brain. So everything I've covered so far about the nervous system also extends to group. Emotions are neurologically contagious. And so this is not really a metaphor. Within our brain, we actually have mirror neurons that are constantly scanning our environment or other people for cues. We're trying to, look for cues if we're safe or if we're in danger. So, somebody next to you might be quite dysregulated. Maybe their voice is raised, maybe their body's tense, they might be speaking fast, and your nervous system will pick up on that state before you've even actually processed what's happening. So you will feel it before you think it. So in the same way, this sort of runs in both directions. So panic spreads fast, but calm also spreads. It just moves more slowly, and it requires a deliberate choice versus an automatic response. So what does this mean practically? So when it comes to teams, maybe in your home right now, in any group that you're part of, the most regulated or most calm person has such a huge influence on everyone else's nervous system. You don't have to have answers. You don't have to pretend things are fine. You just have to be steady. And steady's not the same as numb. This is what we all need from each other right now, is steadiness. So a brief and important point in this slide is we just want to acknowledge that there are systems in place, and it's not, we're not trying to be over positive. These are facts, kind of, where we're not trying to pretend everything's fine, and it's an accurate correction for our brain to make, that it wants to catastrophize by default. When our brain is under threat or when we feel under threat, we will, maybe make assumptions of worst case scenario because it's kind of like an evolutionary response, like I spoke of. Part of regulation here is correcting that bias with factual information. So these are those pieces, is that authorities are monitoring, systems are in place, organizations have plans, and precautionary steps have been taken. So we can acknowledge that uncertainty without assuming, we can acknowledge the uncertainty that we're all feeling without assuming catastrophe. So by framing it that way, we can just use that framework or reframe. So I'll pass it over to Dr. Samir.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Rahana. So we're thinking about some strategies basically now, thinking about how we can manage these uncertain times. Thinking about how we move away from rumination, so that's kind of like repetitive kind of thinking about this particular situation, to more practical kind of action. So when we're thinking about like where we're getting our information from, how we are kind of learning about the kind of context here, the advice here is to choose probably like 1 to 2 main sources of reliable information. So we're based in Dubai, and thinking about the Dubai UAE government and how they have official kind of channels and information, it kind of helps reduce the likelihood of receiving misinformation, right? And also reduces the chance of feeling overwhelmed by all the kind of information that you're receiving. The next step is around simple safety planning. So in terms of like how you can keep yourself safe and how other people know you'll be safe. So some examples here are around confirming your emergency contacts and a family communication plan. So, in terms of like talking to your family if they might be abroad or far away, just kind of explaining that, look, you can expect me to contact you maybe twice a day, once in the morning, once in the evening, whatever, you find manageable. And then have a plan around like, if you don't hear from me, what could you do to reach out to me? The important thing here is to kind of plan once and then trust the plan, not kind of going back to it, kind of, mulling it over. That kind of leads into that rumination kind of cycle. And the third point here is around daily structure. So kind of making sure you have a routine, despite the kind of uncertainty. And I know it's really tricky, especially if you have kids and like spring break's been moved forward by a week. But routines can be really, really helpful, even during times of off timetable routine. So even things like, wake up times, Ramadan is really good for structure, like Suhoor and Iftar, it gives you a lot of time, the prayer times as well. And also things around like movement times, to kind of help regulate yourself through the day, right? So it's kind of a shift from like thinking about what if things happen. It's more about regulating yourself by like thinking about what you can do, what practical things you can do to kind of manage yourself in this situation. So in terms of those plans that I just mentioned, to summarize it, it's around having 2 plans. So one is that safety plan, so what you make once and you contain it. And then that's around kind of reducing those what ifs, so like what if this happens, what if that happens, you already had an idea about what to do because you have a safety plan. So what if this happens, I will do that. And then you can do that for all the kind of what if thoughts that you have. And also they give you practical solutions to what if worries, which is really kind of uncertainty. And then also reduces that background anxiety. So what Rahana was talking about in terms of like activating different parts of your kind of like a vagus nerve system. And on the other side is around the daily plan. So having that routine, that rhythm, that sense of normality for yourself, in terms of having structure, which is really important to everybody. Focusing on what you can control, rather than what isn't in your control. And that signals safety to your brain, because again, if you're following a routine, you're following a pattern, your brain is like recognizing this, remembering this, it kind of puts it in a state of kind of like calm rather than one of uncertainty. Both of these suggestions help manage anxiety in different ways, and they're both very effective. Sorry, I can see people have their hands up, by the way, so I can't see the chat function. I've hidden it so I can see all the presentation, but Remo is there hopefully to answer any questions in the Q&A or chat. So again, just to kind of like summarize this safety plan, having 1 to 2 reliable news sources, confirming your emergency contacts, agree that family communication plan, and follow your employer guidance. Remember to do this once and do not repeatedly visit it, because that will increase your anxiety. We'll try to contain it here. And then that daily plan, this is just a suggestion in terms of like, having a wake time, your working blocks, your breaks, time for movement as well. That's really important. Even, during these uncertain times, making sure you have time to get up and move around to regulate your body. Having light exposure as well, connection with other people. That could be family, friends, colleagues, and also wind down time after work. It's really important because the routine tells our brains that life is kind of continuing despite these uncertain circumstances. So I kind of touched on this before around like where information is coming from and how we receive it. It's kind of a point around like scrolling and social media and use of our smartphones. So refreshing news can feel productive, but it can quickly become a cycle of distress. So if we're kind of constantly monitoring kind of news or social media outlets, it can increase our anxiety, it activates the nervous system, and it can reduce our concentration. I like this phrase at the bottom. So information without action causes agitation, because you're getting all this information, but then what can you do about it, right? What's in your control versus what's out of your control. And unfortunately nowadays as well, especially because of our social media kind of era, there's a lot of information going around which could be misinformation as well. So there's lots of things here that might increase someone's anxiety. So how do we kind of manage this? So here's a strategy to kind of think about how to regulate that need to kind of scroll. So if you feel the urge, please take a moment to pause. It's like stop that kind of, like scrolling up kind of movement. And instead of that, have a deep breath, okay? Really deep conscious breath. The deeper you go, the better it is, okay? It really just helps your body slow down, take a step back, and gives you a moment to kind of reevaluate the situation, which leads on to the final point around replacing. So choose a regulating action instead. So instead of like thinking about, oh, I should be checking the kind of social media around like information around what's going on, what would regulate me more right now? That's a really good question to ask yourself. So is that around, just it could be spending time with your kids or speaking to some friends, maybe, doing something engaging your senses. Well, we'll talk about this later, but in terms of like, maybe going to a balcony, for example, having a look at the kind of beautiful blue sky, for example. There's different things we can do to regulate ourselves, which don't rely on our phones. So here are some alternatives and suggestions using your hands. So physical tactile tasks can help like discharge nervous energy and ground ourselves. So again, our use of like touch, one of our senses, right? So some ideas are around like mending something in the house or where you are at work, sorting things. It could be your drawer, organizing digital files if you have a messy kind of desktop like I do, gardening or watering plants, and folding laundry mindfully. So mindful kind of like movements and practice. I think it's gets a bit of a bad rep. People think that it might just involve kind of like breathing, like or like meditation. But you can be mindful like in your life, in your day-to-day kind of activities. So and I guess mindfulness at its core is around being connected to the present moment. So I guess that involves things around like engaging your senses when you're doing your laundry, when you're folding it up, thinking about like the feeling of the kind of material or the color of the material. You could even smell the kind of freshly, washed laundry to see how it smells to help you really ground yourself in the present moment. And you can do that with so many other things, like making coffee or having a shower, doing the washing up. I think this mindful living it can be much more accessible for people rather than thinking about taking time out of their day to meditate, which I think is also another useful kind of strategy. But I guess you can integrate mindful living in a much more accessible way. And in terms of like how we engage our mind and body, so thinking about from that mind sort of view. So again, listening to an audiobook can help redirect your attention to what you're listening to. Reading a book physically, completing a puzzle to engage your brain, and cooking as well, which involves many different kind of like facets of our cognitive functions all at once, and also engages our senses, which is a really good multi kind of strategy. In terms of our body, so thinking about how we engage our body to be in the present moment, workouts, again, mindful working out. I think this is very reasonable for people. If you do go to a gym or have access to a gym, really paying attention to when you are working out, right? So like if you are kind of lifting weights, how those weights feel when you're kind of like pushing and giving the resistance, right? Or if you're doing like a squat, how the weights feel on your back, or a deadlift. Really focusing in that moment to kind of, do the best as you can, or stretching, thinking about how the body feels when you're making those different kind of movements. Walking as well. I can't see that last one behind it, but yeah, so I think all these kind of physical things are really helpful again to stay in the present moment. And actually, biologically, physiologically, they do release positive kind of hormones that make you feel good as well, which again can be really helpful during these uncertain times. And like it says there, movement discharges stress hormones, which is very handy. So thinking about reducing anxiety amplifiers. So to lower our kind of baseline anxiety levels, because of course, due to the current context, our anxiety is elevated right now. So thinking about how else we can manage that anxiety. So some examples here around like reducing your caffeine intake. A lot of people might be fasting, so that might be controlled. Actually, sometimes people might finish their fast and have a coffee. And that might be really helpful if you're doing night prayers, but then actually, if you're trying to go to bed and you've had some coffee late at night, that could get in the way in terms of going to bed and having a good night's sleep. Or if you are drinking coffee for the day, I think there's some research saying that probably trying to curb your coffee before 2 o'clock is helpful in terms of regulating your sleep cycle before you go to bed. Because yeah, too much caffeine can impact your sleep, but also your anxiety levels because it's a stimulant. Also thinking about late night news, so thinking about what content you're consuming before you go to bed, because if you're seeing, maybe disturbing things or worrying things on the TV, that's going to impact your sleep before you go to bed, understandably, right? Other things here about like background media and social media groups, where you're getting information from, what is being shared, thinking about what groups are kind of like meaningful and important for you to kind of stay in contact with, and which other groups might be able to be muted for a couple of hours a day, just so you're not kind of getting bombarded with different kind of information or misinformation. And thinking about working from home, so under stress as well, right? So again, structure protects performance. So things that could be helpful if you are working from home is around having a consistent start time. So again, connecting to, having that routine and structure, having a defined workspace. I know we're quite, people have different circumstances, but if you could try and have your workspace away from your bedroom, for example, right? Or at least away from the bed, just so it gives you that kind of separation between like the bed is where I sleep and this place is where it is, that's where I work. So then you're having that separation there. Having clear work blocks as well. So like knowing when you're going to be working and having a break. But also having a fixed finish time as well. I know it's so tempting to carry on working, but actually that can kind of activate our kind of like fight or flight system as well. So yeah, like it says there, avoid blending everything, which I know is really tricky as well, considering the circumstances, but clear boundaries between work mode and home mode reduce cognitive load and prevent burnout. So I think it's important to kind of keep that in mind when we are working from home, and how we have a separation from like the family life, home life, and your work situation when you are, expected to do your work hours. Just thinking about like some micro regulation then during the workday. So how you can kind of keep yourself going and regulated whilst kind of, getting work done. So these small resets that can prevent the kind of uncertainty or anxiety or worry increase over time. So here are some suggestions around like brief practices that you can do between meetings or between like work blocks to maintain steady energy levels, okay? So first one is 2-minute breathing reset. So, spending some time to do like breaths as deep as you can in, and then hold it for as long as you can, and out for as long as you can, right? There are different kind of names for these exercises. It could be like box breathing, for example, or rhythm soothing breathing. I guess the point about all those exercises, though, what I would say at the core is that you need to, first of all, breathe in deep enough, keep it maintained for long enough, and exhale for as long as you can. And you need to do it for at least 10 cycles. I think sometimes people think, oh, I've done it once or twice, it's not working, because you haven't done it for long enough. So my recommendation is always trying at least for 10 cycles to see how it kind of makes you feel. And 9 out of 10 times for most people, it does change people's physiology, and they do feel much more kind of calmer and relaxed. The other strategy here is stand and stretch. So, working conditions at the moment, we are sitting down most of the time, on our desks, on our laptops, computers. It's important to get up and stretch. either stand and walk around just to kind of help regulate, but also kind of bring us back to the present moment. Also, it's really good for your eyes not to stare at the screen for too. Another suggestion here is to step into daylight. Daylight is really helpful in terms of like the light and how it can make us feel. Also, the kind of like the rays and the kind of important kind of vitamins that we receive from that. But also help regulate our kind of brain in terms of like, okay, we're noticing that it's daytime versus when we notice when it turns into nighttime. And again, this last one is around probably not around Ramadan time for people who are fasting, but drinking water mindfully. What could be other ways of being mindful during Ramadan, right? So like I've been mentioning around like prayer, for example, when you're praying and you're on, doing your kind of prayers and sujood on the prayer mat, thinking about how the prayer mat feels, what you can hear when the imam is kind of reciting the Quran, how you feel when you're in different kind of positions when you're praying. There's so many different ways, you can be mindful whilst, practicing, fasting during the month of Ramadan, right? And of course, during iftar, when you're having a lovely water or kind of milk, you can see that how you can really focus on how that feels, isn't it? And I know as well, like it's really lovely when you have that chance to break your fast and taste the dates and things like that. I guess parenting while working as well. This is something I experienced, having two little kids. Dual cognitive loads increases stress, right? So, and it does, it's hard to kind of manage if you've got kids in the background and you're trying to do your work in at the same time. So I guess the important thing here is around that lowering your kind of standards in terms of perfection, right? I mean, not everyone's a perfectionist, but in terms of like just being a bit compassionate to yourself, right? Kind of understanding that because of this situation, it is going to be tricky because you might have your kids running around in the background or trying to get into your room and you are trying to work really hard. So things that we can kind of focus on, which are in our control. So like having like a visible schedule about what you're aiming to kind of get done, having some clear expectations as well. Short work blocks as well to kind of manage your attention, and also brief connection check-ins. So, if that's, you just want to quickly check in on your kids and like have a little cuddle with them and play with them really briefly. And then maybe set a timer as well, make it visual, so then your kids can see like, when the timer goes, daddy or mommy needs to go back into the office and work. That can be really helpful to set expectations. So yeah, connection is greater than perfection, and that I agree with that as well. I think it's about doing a good enough job as parents and in terms of us as being employees as well, especially during these uncertain times. And just thinking about how we can support other people. I guess, like Rohana said before, it's about, anxiety might spread, but so does calmness, right? So, when we are calm, that calmness spreads to our friends, our colleagues, our family members. It's not something where you have to kind of impose yourself and say, oh, I can see you're struggling. It's about those passive kind of actions you can do in terms of like, lowering your voice, slurring your speech. I know I speak really fast, so apologies about that. Avoiding catastrophic language, so trying to not kind of jump to conclusions or kind of spread any kind of uncertainty or fear, and being practical in what you say. So kind of like having tangible things that can be done to support people's regulation and also provide a plan as well, like what I kind of mentioned earlier. I guess the important point here is to not argue with fear. So thinking about regulating first and then reasoning second. So that can apply to yourself as well. So, if you're noticing that you're feeling worried or uncertain, try and manage that first using your own kind of strategies. And once that's okay, then you're able to kind of support other people. It's that metaphor, like when we go on an airplane and they have those messages, you need to put your own mask on before you put someone else's mask on. And I think that applies to us as well in terms of like how we support other people. So we need to make sure we're regulated and then we can regulate other people. And thinking about, what phrases could help to spread that calm, like I've been talking about, right? So our language is really important, and using simple, steady phrases help regulate our nervous system and people around us as well. So, some of these things that I've used with my kids, and my friends and family. Right now, we are safe. We have a plan. Let's focus on today. We'll respond if anything changes. One step at a time. All these examples, you can see they're short, they're snappy, they're to the point. And I think that's what's really important when we're trying to instill calm within ourselves and also to other people. thinking about, how do we calm ourselves? This emotion regulation strategies, okay? Emotion regulation tools. So how we calm our body. Some of these things we've talked about already. So kind of like that physiological sigh. So like a really double inhale and a long exhale. The 4-6 breathing technique. So that's breathe in for 4 seconds, out for 6 seconds. I've also mentioned box breathing, which is a variation of that. You can also put cold water on your wrists or slap or put cold water on your face. Like really cold water. It's really, really helpful way to kind of like put our bodies back into the present moment and snap ourselves away from like whatever kind of difficult thoughts or feelings we might be experiencing. Or a cold shower, or a hot shower, whatever you prefer. Just something that kind of shocks our system a little bit. I guess another one is a wall push. So kind of like pushing yourselves on a wall, engaging your muscles, feeling that kind of tension and that pressure between you and the wall. Again, very good way of like grounding in the present moment. And this one is called like the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding method. It's also known as the 5 senses, where we activate all of our senses in a particular way. So I think it's 5 things we can see, right? 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. And I guess the important thing about that exercise is around not to do it really fast, just really take your time to really think about like what is going on around you, right? So what can you see? What can you touch? Really spend your time thinking about the texture. Get really like intimate with those kind of things you can touch and what you can hear. Again, it really just brings you back to the present moment, away from those difficult kind of thoughts or feelings you might be experiencing. So these really handy strategies that I talk about in psychological therapy. And the important thing here is around like regulation before rationalization. So we can't think our way out of a stress response because, like as Dr. Rahana was saying, it's a physiological kind of thing our brain does. We have tricky brains, so we need to kind of think about how we work with our brains to feel that sense of safety. And a really, really kind of hack way of doing it is by activating our physiological systems. So like using our breath, using our senses. So stress becomes overwhelming. Stress is normal, but sometimes there might be certain incidences where you think your stress is overloaded, and you might need some kind of professional support. And again, because of the circumstances, that makes sense. It is a really tricky time. So I guess one thing to kind of keep in mind is like these are some examples of things that might mean that you could do some extra support to think about how to manage the stress or the worry. So if you're having kind of persistent insomnia, so trouble sleeping, any kind of panic symptoms around like a racing heart, breathlessness, irritability, affecting like relationships or work. There's other kind of responses Dr. Rahana talked about, so like emotional shutdowns or numbness. We might also call that dissociation, or increased using of like substances to cope. So it could be like smoking, vaping, wine, things like that. It's important to kind of notice these things because, I'm always about kind of like nipping things in the bud. So like prevention rather than cure, trying to get to the earliest possible stage before things develop and it gets more trickier to kind of support somebody with. So early support is protective. It means it kind of prevents things building up into something else. Just to kind of finish up, we do have some resources here, and we will try and produce like a kind of summary sheet of all the kind of information we've given today, but also these kind of websites that can be really helpful. Again, thinking about 1 or 2 things that could be really helpful to kind of check into in terms of like information sources from the news, or like strategies around how to manage your mental health. So like WHO or Mental Health Foundation. In terms of us as a kind of a company and what we're getting up to, we are kind of providing more kind of events and training for people. So we're working on like a mental health and wellbeing skills for managers and leaders workshop. It's 2 half days, and that can be at your workplace or online. And we're also doing lunch and learn sessions as well, where we're spending time with people around these kind of topics. So around like mindfulness for busy professionals. I know you have some of that already at EY, but like women's mental health, neurodiversity in the workplace, men's mental health as well, which Remo and I have delivered before, and managing stress and burnout. So there's lots of kind of things we're working towards as a clinic. So yeah, final takeaways, and then we've got time for questions. Please regulate yourself first. Make some plans, right? One is a safety plan, and the other one is a daily plan for everyday kind of structure and routine. Replace scrolling with action. lower those perfection standards and be a bit more compassionate to yourselves and other people, right? And stay connected. And importantly, seek support early if you do feel like you do need a extra kind of hand to kind of get through these challenging times. So, yes, we've got to the end of the slideshow. We've still got time for questions, okay? Um,
Dr. Samir, it's just Cassandra here.
Yeah.
We've got one question. Could you just take a couple of minutes to go back through the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique, please? And if
Oh,
you
yeah.
could share the slide, it would be great. A couple of people missed the first 15, 20 minutes or so.
Okay. So you want to see the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 slide?
Yes,
Is that right?
please.
Okay, let's try and find that.
For those that want, I've actually also shared an illustration in the chat that they can download. It's just a depiction of what the different senses are and how much.
Oh, did you do that, Remo?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's in there. Okay. Right. Can people see my screen? It's on there as well. Oh, I haven't got the chat function open now, actually. Right.
Simi, I guess what they were specifically requesting was like, what's the different senses and how many for each? So like, what do you do for 5 times? What do you do 4 times, and so forth?
Okay. So yeah. Okay, Rahana's kind of answered as well, so thank you for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes it kind of depends where you get the resource from, so they might switch around like the touch in here, but the seeing is always like the most you can kind of do, and taste is always like the last one.
Yeah,
And there are some other questions here.
getting back-
Sorry, yeah. Go.
No, it's just really about getting back into our body and out of our minds. So that's why it works so well. And so just finding like little details when you're looking at things. So, like Dr. Samir said, we don't want to like rush through this. So when you're finding 5 things in your environment, you might try to take it one level of detail further. Do you know what I mean? So like I see, for example, a vase, but like maybe what does the texture look like? Maybe is there a chip in it? Like to really like engage your eyes with that object. And that goes for all of the senses. And one thing is that taste can really be really powerful one too. If you're, finding it hard to get back into your body and out of your mind. For example, a coffee bean, like chewing on a coffee. I know we talked about, or something bitter, like a lemon, for example. It can because it just shocks our system into, we just engage with that sense. And then in that moment, thinking then becomes harder to connect with. So just a couple examples.
And
Okay,
by the way,
so-
we have a lot of questions. I have like 10
I know.
written down.
I see one that's
Can I
coming
just
up quite a few times.
Fire them up.
Yeah. So I'll read it out loud and then I'll see Remo or Rahana. I'm happy to answer as well. How can we train our minds to make peace with uncertainty?
I think there's so many e- elements to that, and at least for myself, I think like step number 1 is rather than focusing on what we are uncertain about, like step 1 is focusing on what we're actually certain about, so that we're giving ourselves a little bit of control there. And then the next step, at least for me, is also just acceptance, but that can be very hard to achieve. But like acceptance that the world is incredibly complex, and there's so many big forces in the world. Can't expect to be in control of all those forces. And at least what I like to say is that the world that we're living in, it's one big mix of amazing and challenges as well. We just have to enjoy the challenges as much as we can as well.
Yeah. Rahana, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's kind of, really acknowledging that it is uncertain and that is. And so we can either spend time thinking about that and making and activating our nervous system, or we can acknowledge that it is uncertain. And again, like Remo said, like try to engage with our body or the things that we can control. So it really goes back into, like that's why those routines and stuff are really important. That's why engaging in our body is really important as well. when we're feeling that. And I think the biggest thing is just acknowledging it. You know, when it's feeling really loud and in your body, you can say, I feel things are uncertain and this doesn't feel good, right? Like just naming that, giving space for that is really important.
You know, I'm totally in agreement. I also think there's something about like the workability of having this push and pull with uncertainty, right? Like how workable is it for us to kind of like have this tug of war with the kind of uncertainty? I guess I would think about like how we can connect with our values. So values are things that give us meaning and importance, right? And what we know is when we're connecting with our values, it could be various different things. It could be about your physical well-being. It could be about your work. It could be about your family, your friends. When you're being in the present moment and living your life in accordance with your values, it means that that kind of uncertainty has less of a kind of impact in your life. And I think that's, you know, again, with psychological therapy, this is what we talk about quite a lot in terms of like how to live a life in line with your values. So I think there's lots of different suggestions we've given today which can kind of help manage the uncertainty.
And there was an interesting question too, actually, with there was a person in the beginning that was asking, surprisingly, I'm getting more anxiety from messages from relatives asking about the situation on the ground. So people who like most of us have family abroad and then are being barraged by questions and these anxious things from family members. Do you have any feedback on that? How can we manage that anxiety?
Yeah, I think it's like what we talked about in the presentation today, like that notion that panic spreads, and you know, our family that's abroad, they also are getting bombarded with their own bits of information. I don't know what everybody's seeing everywhere, but just like Dr. Samir talked about, maybe creating some boundaries around that communication. So, for example, if you're in a WhatsApp group chat where you know, or if you're talking to a family member that is like constantly checking in and you're noticing in your body that anxiety is like rising, you might limit the communication to maybe a couple times a day or whatever feels, you know, appropriate for you. But if you're finding somebody's maybe like inundating you constantly or like creating that background anxiety or hum for you, that can be really helpful to sort of try to control or mitigate that or make it in your control, I guess.
I guess we probably have time for maybe one more question or two. I don't know if anyone else has anything else they wanted to say, any questions or comments or reflections on today.
There was a question about how to maintain clear thinking in a situation where we don't have the broader overview. But I guess that ties into a little bit with what we were talking about, how to maintain or like how to reduce anxiety even though there's so much uncertainty. And I think like it really comes back to like accepting the like what we have control over and also like accepting that there are just things in our life that are uncertain and out of our control, and focusing on what we actually can act on. Yeah.
Thanks very much for that. I'm sorry, I'm scanning all the questions and the comments. There's really good chat here. Really like people sharing their kind of suggestions as well, like things they can do to kind of be in the present moment. Like Wordle, taking time with jigsaws, absolutely. It's great to see the interactive chat. I'm sorry I couldn't see it earlier. I hid it so I could focus on the slides. Yeah, so any other sort of questions? You know, this is we've got 3 psychologists here, so any other questions you want, now's a good time. I guess if not,
Well,
I guess
yeah, I think we can close the session. So I wanted to just say, you know, thank you everybody for joining today. We appreciate that it was short notice, so thank you so much. As Salam mentioned in the chat, we will definitely be seeing what additional sessions we can run. So thank you so much. A huge shout out to Dr. Rihanna and Samir for joining us today, and Remo as well. Thank you. I know it was also very last minute, so I wanted to just say thank you so much for that. To everybody on our call today, just a reminder, don't forget about the Employee Assistance Program, EAP. You can find the link on our MENA Talent Hub. We welcome any feedback, okay? We've definitely taken on note the point around recording future calls. So any other feedback that you have, please feel free to reach out to me. Everybody, thank you so much. Stay safe. Remember your own well-being. I like what you said before, Samir, about putting on your, when you're on the flight. So that's absolutely key. So again, thank you so much, everybody. Please stay safe and remember we're here, and do not hesitate to reach out. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you.